Good morning, everyone, everywhere here now with us as always. It is January 22nd in the morning, 9 a.m., 9:15. This is the last Sunday of this month. We're going to meet and discuss the mental obsession, and we will be back live again on the 5th. If there are other episodes or other topics that you would like to listen to, this may be a good time to do it in the next couple of weeks. I added maybe a disclaimer or something to that effect regarding the episodes themselves, and that none of them are really time sensitive or have a shelf life per se, in that the focus of our discussion is more primary to what the present nature of existence is than it is some historic lesson. And yet history tends to reveal what we have consistently done through it to confirm the point we're discussing presently, which is that the mental obsession is a reactive tendency only found in humans that I can tell, that is driven by our own internal drive to protect thoughts we have that have no basis other than in the thoughts we have about those thoughts in terms of them being real and true. To propose that what we think is real and true is to propose that reality and truth has no basis until we start thinking about it. And I would suggest that we are designed to express reality and truth, and that we are a product of reality and truth, and that to be reactive in ways that we shut down around ideas and thoughts that are expansive is to seemingly protect ourselves when in fact we're condemning the self we're protecting to the limits of the ideas that we're maintaining, that would give us the impression that we're securing ourselves while in fact we're actually creating a very, very insecure and doomed future. We're actually boring a hole into that future, and then in the name of making believe we're right, rather than begin to actually witness the reactive tendencies are simply a knee-jerk reaction to the idea that what we're thinking is truth and reality, rather than simply an idea, which is, as far as I can tell, an imagined concept. They're illusions. And like any mirage, to consider it real would mean to exhaust all of one's energy trying to get to the place that might save us, when in fact the thing we're acting on is killing us. And that is a very good definition for compulsions and addictions, which are what compulsions are. And they are all slow forms of suicide, some fast, some slow. They are not decisions to kill ourselves today, but decisions to do something we don't think we can stop today in the name of feeling better tomorrow. The promise is always in the future that never comes, and the present nature of our actions is always damning where we are today. And we've talked recently about, the question has been asked, how do we stop it? And I think the more important aspect is to notice that our existence, if we didn't exist, there would be no cause to do anything. There would be no anything to do. Our existence is the cause that creates the effects that we witness. If we overlook how we are and who we are as we are, in the name of attempting to find something else somewhere else that will solve the problem of the looking we're doing, we are missing the essence. We're not really missing it, but in the thinking we're doing, we're missing it. So our human functional capacity and ability is limited by the liability, literally the liability of that other state of seeming awareness that we're insisting is who we are and what we are and all we are. So there is nothing that can be said here so clearly as to get through any ears unwilling to listen, because we all have the choice to hear what we do. And I would suggest, if we as a species have been reactive and obsessive thinking for as long as it seems to have occurred, then we have come to a conclusion that it may be all that we can do. And I would say that's just a repetitious idea about the exact same problem. The idea that's an addiction. All we can do is the worst thing. That is actually textbook addiction. The only thing we can do is the worst thing. Seems obvious that if we can only do the worst thing, anything better than that would be not as worse, not as bad. So it would certainly be easy to recognize that can't be true. It's just a conclusion, self-serving conclusion for the thinking that's being done. So when I look out into the world and I think how the world is how I think of it, I don't think of the world at all. I only think of what I think. And my arm and my legs don't think of themselves, so they do exactly what they're designed to do, just like nature does. And only thinking seems to have this interesting capacity to think of itself and imagine the self it thinks of as reality and truth, which I would say is ego and has been a haunting image that has been created through history to give us the impression that internally we're fighting for something, we're fighting for our life, when actually we're fighting for the death of our own existence in the name of a slow form of suicide, in the fact that we have been avoiding options that are available, that are healthy, that are sustainable, that are natural, that are easy, that are simple, that are abundant, in the name of generating scarcity and threats and attempts to carve out a piece of it all for our own, when we are at peace amongst all of it that is known right now, always have been. And it just simply seems to be a dysfunctional trigger that has been utilized as though it's the only thing we can do for centuries, millennia, etc. And speaking of that, John, who is with us today, introduced me to a show that features a gentleman that he has read his books for years, called, what was it? Ancient, I'm forgetting, John.
That one is Ancient Apocalypse.
Apocalypse on Netflix. And what's interesting in that, and not only is the history that this journalist, what's his name, John?
All right, keep muting. His name is skipping me at the moment.
All right.
Concussions later.
Well, you know the name of the show, and we'll get his name in a second. But what's interesting is not only the expanded proposition he's making about human history and the elevated knowledge in human history that seems to be discounted by the archaeological industry or field. But what's interesting in my focus is to see how quickly the preponderance of archaeologists have dismissed what he's saying because it doesn't align with what they've been saying. And science, as I understand it, is an exploration of going beyond the limits of thinking, recognizing that there's always more that can be discovered, rather than defending the limits and making believe it's all that is known, because it would challenge the presumptions made to date and undermine the thinking that's been done, so much of the thinking. And it's no different than when Copernicus said we're not at the center of the universe, and threatened all the organizations at that point that had promoted the fact that we were, and felt undermined and threatened as a result of this new thought, and threatened to kill him to shut him up because of their own investment in that thinking. So I would say that's been a human liability for a very, very long time. And we are all participants in that liability to the degree that we engage on those points, where we are, how we are, as we are. So if I'm looking at the world and thinking of it as only as I think of it, since those thoughts are wrong, those thoughts are very susceptible to challenge. And for me to be defensive about those thoughts is to preoccupy myself with a life that I don't actually have, which I think I'm repeating at this point. It's the life of an idea that I have about who I think I am, when in fact it is not who I am, because what I am and who we are collectively is based on the same thing. We may have some individuation in that in some spiritual sense. I don't know for sure. But it does not separate us in an essential sense, any more than essence can be any more or less than the essence of what it is. And if our essence is absolute, if our essence is infinite, if those actually exist, and I would suggest what would appear to limit the finite, but something greater than the finite, which would be infinite. And at the same time, the infinite can't limit the finite. So we must be limiting the finite in the name of protecting the scarcity that we've been clinging to in our own thinking, which is probably not healthy, and probably not what a world struggling with its impact on the world we're struggling in would be helpful to, and it would be helpful with in terms of the thinking we're doing in relation to that struggle we're having. And yet I suspect that struggle is very clear evidence that it may be time to look honestly at what we're doing. And if it is, why don't we look honestly at everything that we're doing in relation to that, rather than just fix a few things and get back to the sort of misery of that thinking that has been so prominent and so prevalent. So that is my often long-winded intro, and we're here to talk about it. It doesn't mean this conversation is all in agreement or aligned, and it doesn't mean what you hear here is absolutely true. But if we share a truth, and that truth and reality is the basis of our existence, that is about as clear cut as it could possibly be and simple to rely on, without having to add any other complications to it, because I would suggest anything beyond that becomes complicated, not because we can't entertain those thoughts, but because if we think they're true and real, we begin to complicate what is absolutely simple, because the essence of essence does not change. The essence of something real and true does not change. That would be an essence well beyond the thinking that we're having, and yet it would also be within the thinking that we're having if it in fact exists. And that's what we're talking about. Good morning, gentlemen, so far. Douglas, welcome. Gabe, John.
Morning.
I know Anthony's over in France struggling to get in, and I think Loretta's going to be here. But meantime, I think that introduction, John and Gabe, we were talking about it earlier. It's interesting simply to consider a greater knowing, which the Incan and Mayan and Egyptian and many, many cultures over time, including some that show that's on Netflix revealed that seem to be mysteries, but obviously exist, were pretty intelligent. And in many cases, thousands of years ago, performed feats that would be hard for us to perform today with all of the technology and the massive cranes and tractors and whatever we've developed to be able to manage the natural resources we have. They seem to accomplish it with none of those things.
Well,
And yet,
we don't
did.
know.
Yeah. But they probably didn't have a John Deere tractor.
They very well might have.
Well, my sense is, if none of the remnants included the ways they did it were so natural that it's basically just blended in to nature, which if I'm not recognizing my own nature and recognizing I had to have a greater knowing essence than my thinking, I would clearly and quickly look at a world and not see what's there. And not notice the natural aspect of what's there and what's possible within that world.
I think we're finding as we complicate things with all of our modern technology that it's very easy to step out of balance with what really is, with the way things really work. It's very easy to.
Complications would naturally do that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, think of instability in thinking. That mental instability is exactly that.
We're building a train. We, the Mexican people, are building a train across the country called the Mayan Express or something. And they're plowing through ancient forests, kilometer after kilometer, grinding through these old ancient ruins and all of this old natural growth. And they're finding that the effect now is rippling out. It's rippling out into the wildlife, into the local indigenous populations, into the flow of birds and traffic and everything there is because of this one obsessive thought that we need more tourists in the Yucatan. You know, it's
Well, it's interesting. They're rushing people to the Mayan ruins by ruining the Mayan history.
right.
No, I read about that. And apparently some of the caverns and caves that were developed that are immense under the ground are collapsing, and some of the water, the ways they were able to get water and all that stuff are starting to get disrupted. I don't know that those are cenotes, because I think cenotes are natural.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a tremendous ripple effect that happens with this obsession that is, once we stop. I mean, if they were to stop building the train, it wouldn't be too long when nature would take back all of that area. The tracks would turn to rust, but over the next century or two. But as long as we continue and persist, we're just in a spiral of.
So let's just think of that, Douglas. Let's just think of that as a macrocosmic social impact that's identical to the one that any of us who were addicted to alcohol or drugs or gambling or sex or any of the compulsions we do. The idea that it's the only thing we can do, and the idea that we're serving an interest at the other end of this attempt while destroying the interest that we're serving, is the natural conflict of addiction. Because addiction on a daily basis had me believe I'm doing the best thing I can because I'm not feeling what's wrong anymore. And I'm going to sort out the circumstances that are plaguing me by not feeling them, and thinking that by making them worse, they'll get better in time if I get better at ignoring them. That's the same conflict. It's the exact same thing on a microcosmic individual level that is seen on the global level, which shows that we are intimately bound, and not bound in a condemned way, but simply woven into the identical tapestry that we all share, that would be reality and truth. Morning, Sturgis. That is impacted by everything I do. Everything we do affects everyone else. And what is often the conversation is what's wrong with everyone else. And it's interesting that we could have such great clarity with what's wrong with everyone else and not stop and say, maybe it's time to stop and look at what we're each doing individually that's affecting everyone else. We have this general conversation about, we have great clarity of what's wrong in the world while we're suffering from self-doubt and uncertainty and instability. It seems like a pretty good indication, because it's that same oxymoronic thinking that's in play. It is no different. It is only different in the time, the place, and the face. MK, good morning.
Good morning.
Talking about addiction.
Hello.
Good to see you.
You as well. Missed you guys.
Thank you.
And ladies, if there's any.
Very nice.
Not yet. So we started today, just as a little recap, about a show on Netflix that John introduced me to called Ancient Catastrophes, or Ancient something like that. What is it? Apocalypse, Ancient Apocalypse. A journalist who basically has been doing a lot of research in the world and looking at sites that exist that have not been made much sense of within the context of the archaeological community. And as a result, discounted by the archaeological community because it doesn't stand up to or live up to the confines of the standard thinking within the community. So we're talking about how each of us, that microcosmic aspect is what we each do. In any way, I hold an idea as truth and reality, and then feel unstable as a result of the maintenance of that idea, because that idea undermines my ability to function, because it is a liability to make believe that I'm the creator of truth and reality. So I become defensive and preoccupied with my attention paid to what isn't happening. And it's no wonder attention deficit disorder is a newly diagnosed anxious or sort of mental disorder, because humans have been paying attention to what isn't happening for so long. Of course, it's going to have an impact on our systems. Of course, it's going to become pathological because we've burrowed that path through the reinforcement of that thinking someday we're going to get this tunnel to China. You know, when I was a kid, they said, if you dig the hole deep enough, you'll be in China. And I thought, well, that's a stretch. But the point is we do a lot of digging as a society and as people and as friends in the conversations we have that seem so misguided. And speaking honestly and openly is to, in my experience, is to begin to admit most of what I do during the day is wrong. Most of the thoughts I have are not right. They're just choices. And if I don't make them, continue to ruminate on them as though my rumination on them makes them right or more real, rather than start to act on them and say, if there's no basis, I'm probably going to run into something that doesn't work very well. Thank you for the lesson. Let me adjust accordingly. And talking about it openly does that, in my experience, because it also reveals the reactiveness. We've had it happen here enough, and I do my best to try to promote that opportunity to see it, because it becomes somewhat obvious with perspective, while it isn't always obvious to the person defending what they're doing, because there is a blindness. Blind faith is the idea that my ideas are all that's happening, and the more I pay attention to it, the better they get, when in fact what I'm doing is not paying attention to what's actually happening. So I think I'm blind, but I'm actually just looking into a void and seeing clearly that it's pitch black. There's nothing there. So looking into blackness and saying you're blind because there's nothing there is missing the fact you have perfect clarity and recognize it. But it's easy in this dance we do to try to make up things to justify what we're doing as truth and reality by coming up with all sorts of other claims to be, we're victims and we're this and we're that. So within the history of civilization, there's plenty of evidence that there has been knowledge well beyond what we have today to build the structures that exist on our planet today, even after all these centuries. And yet it's hard to conceive of the fact that that knowing nature may be the exact same knowing nature we are discounting today by making believe that all we know is what we think.
Mhm.
Morning, Loretta. You're
Good
on mute.
Good morning, Jack. I'm sorry for the noise. I'm in the garage and my husband is leaving with the car.
There's
Of course.
you telling us that we're more noise than he's made yet.
I don't think so. The door's fixing to go down. I'm so apologetic. Maybe I can mute myself and you can't.
Yeah. So our focus and the focus of the podcast in terms of people being able to listen to this conversation is to start to stop and to start to notice and to start to say, wow, if I'm at the center of this, if my existence is cause for my experience, which I would suggest it is, if my existence is cause for my experience, then there is no effect that I witness that I am not involved in and responsible for and accountable for. None. That does not mean I cannot act irresponsibly. If responsibility and accountability is the nature of my existence, it would be the nature of all of our existence. And to act in ways that are irresponsible would have us feel diminished, not only in our expression of our capacity, but in the sense of fulfillment we might have for our experience of life. Because I would appear to be less than I ultimately am in the thoughts I'm having about who I think I am, as though they are true and real, rather than simply what I'm thinking about my thinking. So I said earlier, before I think Sturgis and Loretta and Michael MK came on, that my arm knows to be an arm. My leg knows to be an arm. It doesn't think about itself. But the one thing in my arsenal of opportunity, if it's an arsenal, in my choices, my toolbox, that can think of itself is my thinking. So when thinking thinks of itself, it doesn't think of me. It thinks of what thinking's thinking of. And I am the one that chooses those thoughts. I am essentially the one that decides to make decisions to do things. And all decisions, all choices are wants. They are all desires. They're all acts of desires. Every single one of them, always. I want something, and there's nothing wrong with wanting things. Buddha said that attachment is suffering in life. He didn't say life is suffering. He said, and if he did say that, he was referring to this temporary arc of existence that we spend on earth as suffering when we are addicted to attachment. And the ideas we have as though they're true and real rather than simply thoughts. And his enlightenment was coming to terms with the fact that it was just a parade. It's just something passing by. It wasn't who he is. They were illusions. They were basically, if I think an illusion is truth and reality, then I don't think very much of truth and reality. I think it's very flexible. And it's like a yoga teacher that's trying to overcome stress. Where would the stress be coming from if it were all an illusion? So when I think who I am is an illusion, all of a sudden I have become the creator of reality. And this is ego. This is just what I'm thinking about my thinking. It's not who I am. It's just an idea I have. And if I make believe that's who I am, and now I have to struggle, how am I ever going to get to reality and truth when I think I'm the creator of it and living in a miserable state, suffering that? There's no way to get there. It's impossible. It's been the seeking humans have done through history. We're always seeking, and we never seem to be finding to still be seeking. Seems to be something lost in this mix. And it's the premise. It's the beginning point. It's the idea that my choice is going to fix the problem rather than see there is no problem to fix. And in this discussion, we've often come up against how do we stop it? And we've talked recently about noticing that we're starting it and begin to embrace it. And a lot of times that is just embracing the compulsive behaviors that come up and starting to say, is it even possible that I could want this to happen? And as you do even consider that, you'll see that it's not only possible, you'll start to be reassured by it, because even considering something true as true begins to reveal the truth simply in the effectiveness and the readiness of its availability. Even just considering it. So you don't even have to agree with it. You don't have to vote for it. You don't have to send in you don't have to click yes, I like, or heart, nothing. You just consider it. And if
You don't gotta share.
What's that?
You don't have to share.
Yeah, it's just there. By the functional capacity that is revealed that the consideration is at least on a path that's righter than the one that reveals a fight immediately and a defensiveness and an irritation and an antagonism. Because the antagonism we think is everybody and everyone else is our own sickness thinking of ourselves. Who could be more antagonizing to any of us than a self we think we are that's going on 24 hours a day in our brain in exactly the nerve center that registers pain? The brain is where pain is registered. It's not registered in my arm when I bump it. The nerves send the signal to the brain feels the pain to say something's wrong, let's do something about that. It's my guidance system, and I'm undermining its ability to guide me productively by making believe I am the truth maker and wondering why I feel so bad all the time. So as I've said before, nobody comes talking to me asking to feel worse and have more negative thoughts. So by simply doing that, they're saying, I have lots of negative thoughts and I feel worse. They're admitting the concession that their underlying sense of presence is disturbed, upset, unstable, unhealthy, unnatural, not simple, complicated. Why? Because when I start thinking reality isn't reality and all reality has ever been is real, what am I going to do to prove myself at every complicated version of that thought and wonder why the world looks complicated? Because I'm not going to take if I'm acting irresponsibly, I'm certainly not going to take responsibility for what I'm doing. That would sort of defeat the point of being insane. So I'm going to say the world is complicated. The universe is complicated. If we're looking out at a universe and thinking it is complicated and we're this sole pair of eyes and brain looking at it, how much good are we going to get out of it that's productive rather than say, I am a part of all that. We are a part of all that. Collectively, we are absolutely intimately woven into that. That is not an accident. It is not a coincidence. It is simply how things are now in absolute terms. And if we look at it that way, the knowing nature of our awareness will begin to recognize those natural things that can be productive, that don't have side effects or byproducts like nuclear waste and all these other things we do to solve one problem and create a bigger one. But if we can postpone the consequence a year or a day, we think we're on the track. If I don't have to face, this is exactly what addiction is. I'm going to feel better today by doing more and more and more. I'm going to completely ignore my responsibilities and wonder why the circumstances I keep thinking are the problem get worse. It's the exact same thing on a global level. So where that starts is with each of us. Why? Because we started every day. We're the ones thinking, each of us. And we're part of that entire population of people that seems huge, but it is not in the symmetry and absolute nature. It is all the same. It is all what we're doing. It's just a bunch of bodies running around trying to look special and distinguishable. And what do we distinguish ourselves with generally? Self-pity, misery, calamity, pain, struggle, suffering. That's why we call people who really elevate themselves and look like they have these incredible lives stars. They're all of a sudden in the cosmos. They're in the constellations. And yet we don't even look at the stars accurately enough to notice that they're giving us perfect information. They're doing exactly what they're doing brilliantly, literally, because they are producing light. And they are part of our heritage. We are part of their heritage, naturally.
Watch out, because I'm an untreated Virgo sitting here, okay? From Texas.
So you're touching on in this I Am That book. Me and you spoke a couple weeks ago, and it took me, I don't know, a couple of days to get through the first 2 pages because you paraphrase the way you've worded certain things he's talking about as well, but you put it in a very different way that is just as complex, in my opinion. So I think this group talking and hearing you helped me understand a little bit more about what he was saying. I could now, he's the thing that he keeps repeating at this point is desirelessness, which is kind of what you're talking about, and fearlessness, and understanding that, that creative, that mind, that how we just repetitively have all these desires, and a lot of our anxieties root in desires. And he just talks about being. Just be. And I've been reading him the last couple weeks, and it's very odd to just even consider that I'm not my body. I'm not my arm. This is just something I'm using right now. It's very enlightening, but I don't have a lot to elaborate on it, but just to even consider it is I'm pushing against something.
Well, and there's no push in something that's naturally yours, because even as you mentioned that you're not your body and have your arms went up in the air and did exactly what you asked them to do to help make the point. right? So you're the commander of that ship, and we are all the
Mhm.
commander of that ship. I heard a woman speak at Brentwood in LA, which is a huge AA meeting on Thursday nights. It's smaller now after COVID, but she was in her 80s and she slapped her arm and she said, "This is my spacesuit. I'm going to wear it as long as I'm here." And she had such a brilliant, elegant, beautiful, I didn't even see her. I just listened to her. But you could hear that she had witnessed things in ways that opened her to things that were possible rather than closed her down to those things in the name of what's impossible. And there's a fluidity that. Now, Michael, to the point, put the book up again too, because this book was profound in my process. A little further away, it's a little blurry. See if you can get his name on there, because the name is the hardest thing. There it is. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. So he is now a fully trained guru. Grew up his whole life in India, learning, having people that taught him, learning, and a British journalist went to visit him to try to debunk everything that he was doing. And he took everything this brilliant journalist thought he knew apart, and the journalist actually grew up in the process. And it's a very interesting question and answer process, that book. The one thing that I think Bill Wilson and the New Direction movement back in the 1800s launched in terms of thinking and introducing an idea that hadn't really been considered. It started with the idea that Christianity was being fractured and that there was a message that was being lost in that fracturing. And some people said, where is the healing that Jesus talked about? Where is the salvation that he talked about? Where is the peace that he talked about? Where is the love? It seems to be broken up into these bits and pieces of fractured organizations. And so what they said was they went back and reread the Bible and looked at what Jesus said, not all the other thoughts and stories and all that stuff, and started to actually look at that. And then they started saying, well, what we want to do is what he said. We want to love and we want to forgive. The Lord's Prayer says, forgive us as we forgive others. It isn't God forgiving us. When we actually take an action to forgive, we're starting to see that we've been mistaking who that other was the whole time and using our experience with them that we thought was so real and true to justify a resentment, hatred against them, that we begin to let go of by seeing that we forgive to be forgiven. Because it's automatic, it's natural. What's unforgivable to us is that we would continue to maintain stories that condemn others while we're witnessing the condemnation. It's the idea that we're drinking poison to hurt somebody else, which is often talked about in AA. Good morning, LA. But the one thing that might be worth noting through all this, that came out of all this, was the ability to help other people, actually help them recover. And some of the founding premises and absolute principles of Alcoholics Anonymous today came out of the Oxford group, that came out of the Washingtonians, that were people looking to say, look, these people aren't derelicts, they're not lepers, they're humans that are struggling with alcohol, and starting to apply principles and starting to help those people and look at them and see that this is an addiction. And it was quite a while off before Bill Wilson and Dr. Silkworth identified the disease and started looking at it as an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind. And all of those things were new concepts. But this now is almost 90 years later. Bill and Bob met June 10th, 1935. We're coming up on that date in a couple of years, 90 years later. And what he saw and what he described was that the disease centers in the mind. And what he pointed out was that self-centeredness was at the root of this problem, and resentment was at the root of this problem. How much more resentful could we be to find out that the person we've been manicuring and developing and refining through the fights we have and the hatred we have for others for not doing what we think they should be doing, to find out that it's all just a manufactured illusion made believe to be true and real. How hateful could we be? Pretty self-loathing would be natural to live that way and all of a sudden realize we're not. So if our nature is knowing, and a present nature would be an all-knowing nature, present absolute nature, we've known all along it's wrong, and the anxieties we've suffered and the disorders we've created and all of the sort of abnormal responses, which are reactions, the fights we've maintained to try to fight for ourselves, and I'm going to draw lines and keep people away from this thing that I'm so upset about. We create these limits for other people to keep them from actually announcing to us that we're maintaining something that's a lie. It's insanity. So the point is that even where he talks about being in place, we already are. We're already being. There is no being that can be lost. Throughout history, people have been trying to tell each other how to stop it, while in fact we haven't noticed that it's simply a knee-jerk reaction that's starting it. That once it starts, it seems to feed on itself like a cannibal, and even cannibals through history have not been known to eat themselves. And if they had, cannibalism would not be a problem, because all the cannibals would be gone. So it's what we do that affects others that ultimately contaminates the whole population and gives us the excuse to look at what's wrong in them and forget that we're absolutely a part of what's wrong in our own thinking. So the point that I think I'm getting to, given that the immensity of the potential to speak to this directly in any words can be as complicating as, or sound as complicated as anything. But if you consider that the reality is real, it's been our natural state the whole time. And all of the byproducts, the dysfunctional byproducts of war and enemies and hatred and all of those things that we do to others have been examples of what we're doing internally to the self we think we are. The castration and the crucifixion and the hatred aimed at that self has been exemplified in what we've done in the world, and we've missed it. And we're continuing to refine ways to get it right, as though we're going to fight our way into righteousness, rather than begin to notice the rightness is already part of our, it's not part of it, it's the essential aspect of our essence. It's where we are as we are now, always. So addiction as a mental problem is a new concept. It's literally less than 100 years old. It isn't a new process. It's a new awareness of what we've been doing. It's a new discussion of what we've been doing. And if we've been doing it as long as we've been doing it historically, all of the things that I can see in my own experience, the anxiety and the stress and the depression and all of the things I've witnessed and all of the things I've done to protect myself, which is to hurt other people in the name of trying to feel better, all of a sudden just becomes a microscopic version of the macroscopic version, the telescopic version I see in the world around me. And there's plenty of evidence out there that something is wrong. And if I look at it as something wrong out there, I perpetuate it. If I begin to see it's what's wrong in my own thinking, I begin to resolve it, because there is no need to resolve something that dissolves, because it disappears when it's seen. Once I know something is true, like 2 + 2, I never went back to 2 + 1 is 4. I never went back. Why? Because it works every time. What am I going to do? I don't even have to think about it. I just apply it. Reality's easy. What's not real as reality is hard, because it never works. And every complicated version of how to apply it never works. And every time I launch in that direction, I'm insane to imagine that it will, because I've already been told it won't work. And what do? Pretend that not listening is my best attribute. Not seeing is somehow keeping me from facing it, while I'm facing it immediately in my experience all the time, and simply not thinking I am, because the problem is in the thinking I'm doing about the thinking I'm doing, not about my essence, not about life, not about love, not about anything. God, it's not about any of that. It's my own lack of forgiving what's happening. So what do? Forget. I'm forgetting, self-centered. I want to get more, when it's never enough. That's addiction. The more I do in the wrong direction, the more I think it's going to work, and the longer it takes to realize for some reason I need pain to finally bring my to my senses because I can't take it anymore, just like I'm being tortured. And basically, as I understand it, most spies eventually give up the information when they're tortured. There's so much pain before somebody says, you know what, here, take it. What's it worth? I'd rather you not gouge my eyes out. And yet we do it to ourselves. And the self we're doing it to is just imagined. Imagine that. Imagine that we go through this whole process to save something that doesn't even exist, to get something that we already have. Talk about insanity. Mental health is dependent on healthy choices, just like food, not surprisingly. So my sense is, Michael, when I read that, and I read that, and I don't remember how long it took me, but like you, I would read, 4 paragraphs and put it down for 2 days. But it was like the Course in Miracle. It unwrapped and unraveled a lot of the thinking I'd been doing that was obviously wrong, because the simplicity of it became so apparent, and the need to think about it became nothing at all. Just became, intuition and awareness starts to become obvious. So getting back to the broader conversation, if we're discounting the world as it is in our own experience, we're discounting the value. And Gabe had said earlier that there's enough, what did you say, Gabe? Enough photons released in an hour a day to serve the entire world's energy needs?
Yeah, something like that. I just read or listened to recently. There's enough energy in the photons the sun sends us in 1 hour to fuel the world for a day.
And I would say that's a glaring example of the fact that we have more than we need. We are misutilizing it to help maintain the thinking and maintain the righteous thinking, when rightness never is righteous. Righteousness is always wrong. This self-indignation, this idea of contempt prior to investigation. When I heard that, Herbert Spencer's quote of the bar to knowledge, the bar to all growth is contempt prior to investigation. I said, well, that's easy. I have contempt after I investigate. That makes things really difficult.
Jack, I heard a comedian, and he said, the planet's been around, 4 billion years, something like that. And humans, I think 4,000, but theoretically 2,000 in our, species of now. I apologize. I don't remember the logistics, but all he said was, as long as the planet's been around, humans have been around roughly 2,000 years, and we've already screwed it up this much. The planet was completely fine for 4 billion years.
Well, and
But
what's
here we are
interesting,
with a short amount of time, and everything's wrong.
we started today also, MK, when John had introduced me to a show called Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix. And it really is challenging some of the basic academic presumption of modern archaeology, because it's showing that there were ancient civilizations that were fairly advanced, to say the least, that knew a lot, that didn't have any of what we call technology, and yet knew things that we don't seem to even understand today. And that's pretty interesting, worth a thought anyhow, that even our own history that we've been talking about in ways that isn't true far exceeds the bounds of the way we've talked about it, but those limited ways would certainly serve the thinking we're doing that isn't true, to make believe that the stories we tell about it are true. And that's why we got into a little bit of a tete-a-tete with stories last week.
Don't use my word tete-a-tete.
Sounds like I got to listen to last week.
I'm sorry, Jack.
Well, sometimes, the idea here is not to feel better about what we're doing that's wrong, because the wrong we're doing is giving us perfect guidance by giving a feeling that we're wrong. And the word that's wrong is the thinking we're doing. It's not who we are. It's what we're doing with our thinking that's wrong. If I asked my arm to pick up a glass and it was an inch off, I would not be able to pick up that glass and drink, whether it be alcohol or water, whether it be killing me or saving me. Couldn't do it. But it seems to work pretty well when I gauge things. If those things were a foot off, I would say to myself, something's seriously wrong. I'd look for help. But when it comes to these mental problems, we don't seem to look for help. We tend to go home and think more about them and try to carve out a life where nobody's going to challenge us and just leave us alone.
Can I interject something here?
Oh, you can.
Well, it's on the first step, which is where I tend to stay. I've realized that my addictive thinking is behind my unmanageability. It's like I can will things all I want, but I keep doing the things I do not want to and not doing the things I want to. It's really perception. And
You see
Mark,
the twist there, though, Loretta, right?
I'm getting there. Mark Twain said it this way. He said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so."
Yeah.
I had to write that down because I found that quote and I thought, it's very true. We can will things all we want, but if we don't see that we're powerless, where are we going?
Well, the powerlessness in the first step.
The ship, I'd rather let God steer the ship.
Well, it's already happening.
Right. But I can choose to get into that awareness, or I can choose to will my own.
So
right?
Let's see how clearly you're saying that. You think that you do things you don't want to do. Do you think if everything we choose we want, it would be possible to be choosing things we don't want?
I think that my will choose everything that I don't.
Who do you think you think your will is? Where is your will? Is it in a suitcase somewhere that you pull out occasionally?
It's two places. It can be with my ego, or it can be with the awareness of another power greater than I am.
Well, first of all, there is no will where God is whatsoever, because if God is infinite, there's no way to actually do anything other than that. It's already, the will is all that there is. That's why
we'll talk about God's will.
Huh?
What is God's will or his will? In the serenity prayer, it says, if I surrender to his will, knowing that everything will be okay.
Yes.
In God's world.
Yes. But what is it saying? If I surrender, what am I surrendering? The idea that I actually even have a will that's worth anything.
Well, but sometimes you don't know that. So I am surrendering.
You can think you don't know anything, and that's a very clever ruse to make believe we don't know better.
Well,
this is one of the points of this conversation that I think is distinct even from what Michael talked about with the guru. There's this presumption that if we don't think we know, we don't know. How convenient for us to once again use thinking as the totality of all we know, when in fact, if we have a knowing awareness, we know that so well, we don't even question it. So what we're really questioning is the thinking we're doing about it. Yeah,
that's right. But we're saying the same thing. Maybe I said it wrong, but
no. I want to challenge the one aspect of what you said. My sense is we even want the things we don't want, or we wouldn't choose them. You know why we want them? Because we're trying to prove that we're victims, that we're the effect of something else, that they're happening to us. My brain and my will and my ego and my thoughts are attacking me. Really? They got a life of their own? Where do they live when they're not attacking me? It's my brain. It's all coming out of my brain. It's all something happening. Lies do not exist beyond the scope of my brain, period.
Right. You're in your head.
Or a brain.
Right. So you're in your head.
So if we're sick in the thought we have about who we think we are, and who we think we are is all we think of that, Loretta. If I think who I am is just what I think, that's a sick thought. If who I am is the essence of everything everyone else is too. If I am that, and that's the name of the book, I am that. If I am the essence of all those things and we all share that, and I think all I am is what I think, and then I choose from that line of thinking, what am I going to choose to do but things I say I don't want?
Exactly.
Okay.
Because you're in your head and you're in your own ego and will, right? Am I following?
Well, you're not really in it. You're utilizing it as an excuse to justify the sickness that you're trying to get over it by maintaining it. And that's exactly what an addiction is. I'm drinking more to feel better about what's worse. I'm taking more drugs to feel better about what's worse. I'm gambling more to create more adrenaline to overcome this hopelessness I know I'm creating.
Right.
In every case, it's twisted.
Right. So if it's flip-flopped, untwisted,
Yes.
and you choose to be in the awareness of knowing, the present time, right?
You already know, though, you've never not been in that awareness. And this is one of the major problems, I think, historically, in the conclusions about this problem.
Okay,
It's starting to see that
elaborate. I'm trying to elaborate this awareness that we already have.
yes,
If we elaborate and let ourselves go to the higher attributes.
we're there, though. We're already there. We don't.
Let's go further.
When
Let's
Loretta, when you let go of the idea that the lower attributes are true, you will naturally notice that the ultimate essence has been there all along. And it's exactly why you felt bad and nervous and upset and insecure. Those were all indications that you had that awareness of knowing better the whole time. You knew it all along. We know it now. We want to try to outthink it because we keep using thinking to think we have to get to it rather than see that we are the essence of it. And all we're doing are giving ourselves false impressions by thinking more about it.
Well, maybe I'm trying to say when we live it.
We are living it. It is life.
That's what I mean. We're living.
But it's not when, it's now.
I know that, Jack. I
Okay.
know. So let me clarify. For myself right now, I am learning and growing.
So
Okay.
for the self that you think you are right now, you're learning and growing.
For the self, I am sitting in this chair.
Okay. So for our purposes here, I want to interrupt. I specifically want to interrupt. It's one of the entitlements I have in this, and used to make it very clear in the announcement that I will, and that I'm here to do that.
We're going
If you're here right now, Loretta, right now, and that absolute state of being is in fact here with us, not just you, with us. If that
Okay.
absolute state of being, anywhere you go from this point in your own thinking about your thinking, is going to give you an impression that you're not here now and it isn't enough. And it isn't because it isn't here and it isn't enough. It's because you're choosing to go back to the thinking to think you need to straighten the thinking out rather than see that any thinking you do about it in any way is going to give you an impression that it isn't here. It's the thinking that you're obsessed with and married to and idolizing and committed to that causes the impression that when maintained is depressing. It isn't reality or truth, because it cannot be flappable or changed. It never changes. It's always our awareness, or we wouldn't know that we were irritated, anxious, stressed, or depressed. None of those things would occur to us because it would be the only nature we had. We would be fulfilled by each of them.
And I understand that, but
Okay, but now you're going to take me down a road trying to sort your thinking out.
no, I'm not. I'm telling you,
Okay.
Thank you for describing my identity for me here. But I also realize you're talking in general.
I'm
Okay.
talking in absolute, not general.
Okay, in absolutes.
Okay, so keep in mind, in an absolute state, there are no exceptions, none.
I'm not defending myself
Why would you even bring that up then?
because it's nice to know.
Because what?
It's nice to know.
But you know, right now, you know.
I do know. I just said it's nice to know. I'm not
Yeah.
defending myself. I'm
Yes.
just saying an awareness cannot be defined by any means. It is the
Yes.
state of right now.
Yes.
But being willing and having an open mind enough, or praying for that, to always bring it in, bring more in.
But you're praying for something that already exists.
I
You
know
want
that.
you want more of something that's infinite.
But maybe I get more every day.
Really?
Maybe I get more
Really?
aware.
You can have more of something infinite? There is
What?
no more or less of something infinite. None.
This is a ridiculous argument.
Yes, I agree.
Um,
But it isn't an argument, it's a statement of fact. An
You know what's crazy,
infinite.
Loretta?
Do
Sorry.
I?
Go ahead, Jack. I was
What?
saying, you know what's crazy, Loretta? You said it's a crazy argument, but to consider that you're having that argument with yourself constantly is just as crazy.
but I'm not. So
Then why are we talking about it if it's not something you do? And you just said you want to know more and you want to grow more.
Because I brought up the fact that my will, if I am going to steer the ship with my will of what I know, I always just learn more.
Of course you do, because you're thinking less. You're thinking reality is what you're thinking, which is always less than an infinite source. It's always going to be less. So you're always going to be stuck in this quandary of wanting more.
Exactly.
Okay. So we kind of went over this last week. And
no, we do not.
If we're trying to feel better about what's worse, if we are trying to feel better about what's worse, this is not aimed at you, Loretta. This is something all of us do.
Okay, but I don't have anything worse.
I see. So that's settled.
Yeah.
So you have everything. You have everything. There's nothing more you can have.
Yeah,
Everything is on the shelf in the back of that garage.
there you go. Let's just go pick one.
I know
Okay.
he was around here somewhere. Hi,
Loretta,
Anthony.
what we're learning to do, if we're learning anything here, is starting to express what we've always known in our thinking. And when I think I'm going to sit down and quantify what I need to do better in my thinking, I'm once again isolating what I'm thinking to my thinking.
Well, I'm glad I'm not doing that.
Okay. So if there's an absolute knowing awareness, this is the intuition, it's knowledge beyond reason.
Right.
And if I've truly conceded this, and I haven't truly conceded it. I have doubts every day. I have things that come up every day that give me impressions that I know are wrong, and they're giving me guidance to things I'm still lurking in my own thinking that are wrong. They're giving me guidance to those things every day. I see those. Now, that doesn't mean
Your awareness to grow.
Excuse me?
Your awareness is enough so you can grow. You can feel it. You can learn from it, right?
It isn't that I'm growing. I'm beginning to simply notice what's given me the impression that I'm shrinking. That gives me the impression that I'm embarrassed. That gives me the impression that I'm self-conscious. That gives me the impression that I'm shy, because those things that I'm doing in the face of knowing everything I know, whether I admit it or not, whether I think it or not, would be embarrassing, having been given everything to pose as something less than that, and then think my struggle and my imposition of that posing nature, that fraudulent nature that I've been promoting is who I am, isn't anything other than an illusion imagined to be true and real, and someday I'm going to get it right.
Right.
Our discussion
I guess trust, if you have a trust and faith.
Well, if you trust in something trustworthy,
you don't really have to worry so much.
No, if you trust in something trustworthy, there's no need for trust, because it's always been trustworthy. It doesn't require anything from us for it to be trustworthy.
Well,
it's like principles. Principles don't wait for us to utilize them to exist.
Well, I guess I have just started to trust 100%. So things have switched or shifted in the way my thoughts are, because I don't have the worry anymore that I used to have.
Yes. Well, not having it the way you used to have doesn't mean you don't have some now about things that are presently being maintained that you don't think you have.
Well, I just don't have any worry at the moment.
Okay.
I feel free.
You are free.
I feel peace and joy.
You are free. Peace. That's the essence of your existence and ours.
No one is going to steal my thunder.
Nobody can. Nobody can.
Why are you hiding behind sunglasses?
And it isn't thunder.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? I'll direct that very quickly and fast. I'm a blonde, a true blonde. Everything on my body is blonde, including my eyebrows and my eyelashes. So I'm very aware, not self-conscious, aware of what I look like without eye makeup. And I feel much more comfortable with it on. And I just woke up. So,
Well, I'm just waking up now too, to this moment.
why is your picture, Phil, not showing?
Because I'm on my cell phone and I'm not signed into Zoom.
Well, you can still have your picture come on from cell phones. Just punch video.
True. Thanks, Loretta.
You're welcome.
So you see how elevated this can evolve so quickly.
Yes, I do.
Everyone.
Riveting. It's riveting.
Yeah, well, think of a rivet.
It is riveting. I can become 5 years old very quickly. Just call me Buckwheat. They're all
Me too, and thank you. Me too. I find myself being pitifully petty, and especially as I've started watching my thoughts honestly, how quickly I come to determinations about other people during the day that completely discount them. When in fact, the chances are I can't possibly be right. There's no way. And yet I find that and see that. And part of the massaging of this process is starting to see that I don't have to believe something's absolute for it to be absolute. I don't have to trust in it for it to be trustworthy. I don't have to have faith in it for it to be faithful. None of it. If it is those things, if those things are it, that's just the way it is, regardless of what I think. So my thinking is relieved on two levels. I don't need to defend anything, and I don't need to fight for anything. I don't need to protect against, because there is no loss in it. And all of a sudden, I can begin to see that it's my thinking that's causing these impressions, and my thinking that's causing these opinions, and my thinking that I'm misutilizing that are giving me the experience, not an infinite source. There's nothing to be lost there. As a matter of fact, you can lose it all, and that's what keeping it is. As soon as I give up everything I think I have, I get to keep everything that I have. Because in the paradoxical world of our seeming world, if I give everything away, I have nothing. That's the paradox. We think of the paradox in AA as giving things away and keeping them. That's not the paradox. That's actually nature. Mm-hmm. We're designed to give it all away so we can have it all. And if we did that collectively, we would be having everything we have in ways that we would relate to them in the most bountiful ways, because we would be noticing the nature rather than coming up with excuses to fight nature and try to overcome it. The same way we're trying to overcome nature is the same way we're trying to overcome the nature of the self we think we are. Constantly trying to feel better about what's worse.
And if we were all constantly giving, each one of us would, in the seeing what's being given to us, would have so many choices that we wouldn't have to fight over choices. We would have so many choices that we would realize that we can choose this or choose that just freely as we go. And we wouldn't have to worry about it, fight for it, defend it.
Do you see how impossible addiction would be in that realm?
Yeah, it'd be impossible.
Because you know what addiction is? It's my only choice. It's all I can do. What else can I do? Right? That's a lie. So let me suggest this, Douglas, to that point. We're already giving everything we have. And we're embarrassed because a lot of the stuff we're giving is shit. And we talk about it openly. I got shit to do. I got to get my shit together. I don't give a shit. What do you mean you don't give a shit? A lot of what you're giving is shit.
We say right in, Bill says right in the, I think it's in the last page of the book, that you cannot give something you haven't got.
Exactly.
But you're always giving what you have.
Yes.
You're
And
always
you know
manifesting
what?
whatever it is that you have at this moment.
That absolute sense, if it's true for us, it's true for an absolute sense, right? So what does that absolute sense give us? But what is absolute? What does that mean? It's all we've ever had. And it's all we have now. What we're doing is trying to intercede on that absolute nature and try to make believe that the misery we pass on is identifying us as individuals rather than a collective of people doing the same sick thing. We're already whole and complete and absolute in our nature. These thoughts we have give us this sense of distinction and this sense of separation and this sense of identity. What would the identity crisis be? Why wouldn't we be in an identity crisis that leads to present traumatic stress if who we were is in fact who we are? There would be no identity crisis in that. There would be no fraud in that. And yet who I think I am, that will that I have, when I think it's true, rather than notice that my will is simply the culmination of a thought that I have that I'm acting on. That's my will. It's just a thought. And it isn't truth and reality. And when I think it's truth and reality, I think that's who I am. And I've got to fight my way out. And everything I do, I have to get back to God. There's no getting back to something we can't be apart from. We can't lose. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We can think that we are. And that's where the problem is. We keep looping back into the thinking and think we're going to straighten the thinking out by thinking more about the thinking and wondering why our self-will seems to be a problem. We were given will to make choices, and really our will is simply choices. That's it. Our will is what we choose to do. And when I'm basing it on what I need to do to fulfill a self that doesn't exist, I'm going to make sick choices. And those sick choices are going to infect everyone else because it's a viral condition that we are all susceptible to and have been largely cooperating with each other. The irony is we've been cooperating with each other on a sick basis to make believe that this unnatural state is normal. There's our cooperative, there's the essence, Douglas, that's coming through. You can't hide it. There's no hiding of it. There's no secrets in this universe. Everything leaks. Everything secretes. And secretion is the basis of secret. Isn't it interesting that the same word actually admits it secretes? It leaks. Michael.
You bring up choices. And so
I chose to.
So something in the book that it talks about is you made me lose my train of thought. There's no cause. Nothing has a cause, meaning you did something that results in something else. And so like I always had an issue with like the choices I would make or trying to prepare for the choices I'm going to make or trying to connect each thing into each other. And he's talking about literally they're just occurrences. So when you're talking about choices, how do you not think that your choices have this ripple effect?
How do you not think that?
Yeah, like I think every choice I make, like Phil's driving right now. So it's like if he gets to where he's safely, it's because of the time he left. Like there's all these stories I want to make up, and that's probably it. It's the story. But anybody I talk to and the news, wherever, it's always there's this ripple effect. And I'm trying to grasp the concept of nothing has a cause, meaning everything just individually happens as it occurs, which you've talked about. Everything happens how it happens, the same way it's always happened.
Well, if you look at things that seem separate, like cause and effect, you start seeing them as the same thing. And to see anything as it is evaporates the thing you think you're seeing, because if it has any basis, it doesn't need to be seen to be. So he's talking a lot. I mean, this conversation can be seemingly confusing because we're talking about the essence of essence. And it isn't something that's debatable, and it isn't something that's optional. And there is no choice in it, by the way. And that's what he's really referring to. He's referring that in the essence of essence, there is no choice because it already is everything. What would it have to choose? Like there is no thought. There's nothing to think about because it already knows everything. But that's not our human experience. And if it were, none of us would be the farmers that feed the guru would not be serving the food that he eats and the space that he lives in. So this concept of thought doesn't relinquish our potential to interact with this four-dimensional world that we're in. But all the other dimensions are not separate from this either because they become seamless, non-causal essence that are completely hard to even comprehend because our brain is designed to function in this three-dimensional world with the fourth dimension of time and space as part of it. That's what we're functioning in. So my job, as far as I can tell, if we have any job, and this to your point, Loretta, is how well am I able to express that knowing in words that are limited, in concepts that are limited, in an attempt that can't actually do it and achieve it, because I can never think it enough to get there. I can never do enough to be there. If I'm already there, especially, where would I have to go to be? I'm already here. But if I can begin to concede, and this was a huge transition for me, that if this, the Course in Miracles helped make this clear. If this is true and truth is true, it means it's true for all of us, no matter what we think. And so the thinking again becomes the culprit whenever we think we're not there and need to get somewhere. It's always the thinking we're thinking with that's giving us that impression. Nothing wrong with that. To think it's true is to think I now need to get to reality and truth rather than simply notice I made a decision to do something that ends up going where it goes. It doesn't go where I think it. You know what expectations are? The idea that my thought is so true that all that should ever happen is what I thought would happen when I initially made the thought.
Right. There is no destination. We're already there.
Yes. And the thinking, as I begin to notice it, is just a functional capacity I have to be productive.
Higher
So I can produce, so I can provide. And the more I have in terms of that functional capacity, the more I have to give on levels that help humans survive. If we already share the absolute nature of everything, everybody always has it. So I don't need to say it right for people to know something's right. Because our own sensation will give us that impression. How long we want to continue to fight for the thoughts we have is up to each of us, because we seem to have been given the on-off switch. And that choice, no choice seems to be ours. The yes, no choice is ours. How long am I going to go recognizing there's turbulence before I realize that it's the conditions I'm in that I'm creating that are turbulent? How far am I going to go? If I continue in that direction, I'm going to feel worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until I get to the point where I'm beyond the threshold I've created. And my sense is we've created comfort zones that are actually killing us because they're trying to give us comfort about things that are uncomfortable. We're trying to get over things rather than concede them in the immediacy of our experience. And so what does it take me? Years to come to terms with the fact that I was a drug addict and alcoholic. Started at 14. I drank 2 8-ounce glasses of whiskey, bourbon and scotch the first time. You think I might have had a problem? Adults don't do that commonly.
But I love what Douglas said, because to me, I don't want to think about drugs and alcohol at the moment. It's like, if you stay where he was talking about, it's with love, kindness, and tolerance and patience.
You're there.
That's what I mean.
You don't have to stay there.
Let me finish. That's what I mean. I'm saying I love what Douglas said, because when you're there giving, you don't.
You're always there.
You don't turn 5 years old so fast if you're giving and being of service, in that mindset.
So I'll say what I said again too, Loretta. It's not the things, like Mark Twain said, it's not the things we think we know. It's the things we think we don't know. It's a little different than his twist. It's the stuff that I don't think I'm thinking that tends to motivate me more than the things I'm thinking about. And when I initially became aware that my thinking was something I was aware of, I thought all I was aware of was what I was thinking. And then I began to realize that I had stored a lot of irresponsible thoughts in my seeming subconscious by getting so used to making believe they were true and being so ashamed to even have them that I seemed to bury them in a darkness, which tends to be the promoter of those ideas that occur when I have those reactive, impulsive, and compulsive behaviors. They're all triggering that. And if I'm not willing to look at that and say, oh, this is giving me some evidence and this is allowing me to witness the depth of what I claim not to see by seeing it in the effects that it's creating. And to your point, Michael, this cause and effect thing disappears it starts to become less important when you begin to realize that everything's been happening the way it's happening all along, and it hasn't been determined by what I think about it. But if what I think about it is only what I think, I'm not even thinking of the thing that's predetermined. I'm thinking of only what I'm thinking, not the thing that actually is. And that bubble, as it bursts, begins to allow things to happen in ways that become a guidance system rather than a predicament and a dilemma all the time that needs to be sorted out because they're off the course I originally set. So I become a little more functionally able as I began to notice that it was the things, Bill talks about it, it's our motives. What we're looking for in the fourth step is the motives, the conditions. What's he saying? What's the condition? I'm depressed. What's the motive for the depression? Probably a weight that's heavy. Why would it be heavy? Something I'm not designed to bear in an absolute pure light. Think of light, the word. It's both bright and light. It's not heavy. The same word, two different functional incarnations that are obvious. If it's heavy on me, I'm bearing down on something. I'm causing a fight. I'm pretending that an illusion is true. I'm doing that in my present state of awareness, thinking it's truth and reality, when in fact it's a dream state I'm creating to make believe it isn't happening, and thinking it's somebody else, somewhere else, something I need to do better than, rather than say, oh, it's a perfect clarity of exactly what I'm doing right now. And if my numbness that I've developed to become insensitive, which I have thought was my whole life, the goal of life was to become completely detached from everything. It's exactly what addiction does.
How about just living in the light, sharing the light, and letting the darkness be? You know, sometimes.
If it were prescribed in that way, it's an easy prescription to want to take the curative for, but I would suggest that there will be instances where you'll ask yourself why you can't seem to escape that.
Well, I understand that.
Yeah. So but I get it, Loretta. You're doing a remarkable job given your, we met at a point when you were just getting sober again, I believe.
Yep.
Like 100 days ago or so. And the challenges I pose is to speak as clearly as I can as a reminder that nothing changes in an absolute sense because our thoughts change.
Right.
But when our thoughts change, and I think I need to change my thoughts, all I'm doing is what they're always doing. I'm just changing them in some new way, hoping for another result and another effect, rather than say, the effect I'm looking for isn't even an effect because it's a state of being that doesn't even, like Michael was pointing out, doesn't even have a cause. It's just an essence that's an essence that doesn't have a beginning or end. So it isn't even in time. It's just a present state of awareness. And I would suggest the present is that awareness. That's where our awareness is. It's right where we always are. And that the infinitesimal inability to break those moments down into moments that are quantifiable is what keeps that present moment from being in time, because it's simply a present state of awareness that is absolutely uninterruptible. And we know when we're suffering and struggling because we know that constancy and that stability and that absolute nature exists. We wouldn't notice the disruptions and they wouldn't bother us if our nature was bothersome and disrupted and uncomfortable and discouraging. We wouldn't know it. We wouldn't recognize it. The recognition of it is the admission of that awareness. So it's melting some of the thinking, seeing that when it dissolves, it isn't a resolution. It isn't something we need to repeat, because as it dissolves, the chances of us choosing it again, given that it's insane to continue to choose the same thing over and over again, hoping someday it'll work, chance of choosing it again is very, very slim. Because we'll know all we're choosing is misery again. Why would I choose that if I had the option of sitting still and saying, I'm already in perfect peace. I'm already where I am. And then the challenges of making choices become an adventure and an exploration in what's possible, rather than trying to make believe the impossible will someday come true and live that depressing, demoralized, incomprehensible state of existence, wondering why I can't get better, why I feel stuck, why I feel like I'm being attacked by other people and other things, and nothing's going to get better, and everybody else is a problem. And if it weren't for everybody else, we have the same conversation in here about an absolute nature, and people have committed themselves to talking about the fact that nobody else will ever do this, when it isn't everybody else we're talking about but us here now. Period. If we can't even conceive of us doing it, certainly it's going to appear as though no one else is willing to do it, anything about it.
Well,
Go ahead, Loretta.
I just wanted to say real quick. Yes, I did just sober up 154 days ago, but behind me, I had broken years of sobriety, which was like 5 years, 11 years of sobriety, another 5 years of sobriety, and that was dry. So I'm not sure which was worse, drinking or dry drinking.
I can guarantee you I never spent longer days on earth than those I tried to fight the urge to drink and use. Never. And if you want to live forever, be a dry drunk. Life will never seem to end. Because there you can see how time changes. I want to use this chance while I've got everyone here, because I know that schedules often interfere with the length of time we spend. Jackie, good morning. LA, I think I said good morning. I've been listening on tape to a book called Alive, I believe it is, by Dr. Bruce Grayson. And I mentioned this to you all recently, and I think that the link to the interview that he was included in NPR about how near-death experiences may change your life, something to that effect. But I've been listening to his podcast. It's called After. And what's interesting is he was a doctor. I mentioned this before, but I'll repeat quickly. He was a scientist studying for his psychiatric degree, had an experience with a patient who'd come in on an overdose, who was literally in a coma, tried to investigate through her friend what had happened to cause the coma, because nobody could figure out what the drug was that she had in her system. And he wanted to know so that he could prescribe things to help save her. I had a discussion with her friend 100 and some feet outside of the room. And when the girl who was in the coma came to the next day, he was telling her about the conversation he'd had with the other woman. And she said, I know, I was there. And he said, what are you talking about? You were there, you were here, you were in a coma. And she said, no, I was with you guys when you discussed it. And I really appreciated her being there. And she talked about it very matter-of-factly. And he said, what are you talking about? And really challenged her. And then he started saying, well, I'm a scientist. I'm going to look at this a little more objectively and do what I can to start to notice that maybe there's something here that we haven't even explored yet. And so he began a 50-some year career now. Near-death experiences had barely even been a term at that time. This is going back, I think, to 1973 or so. The term had just recently been coined by a psychiatrist because they'd been witnessing people having these experiences. So he started studying these experiences, and I listened through a bunch of them today. Then let me give you a couple of the things that people seem to experience similarly, simultaneously. One of them is a review of life. So they're in this experience where all of a sudden the compression of the immediacy to them of their presence is obvious. And this review of life is exactly what the fourth step is. It's a chance to look at our life and what have we done right and wrong. And several of the people stories that I listened to said that the immediacy, the experience was that it wasn't so much something happening in time, but something happening all at once. It was happening simultaneously, but they were witnessing every instance they had with everyone they'd ever had anything with. The difference was some of them witnessed not only their own experience, but the experience of the other people with them, aunts, uncles, fathers, mothers, etc. They also experienced the experience the aunts and uncles and fathers and mothers had to get them to the point that they did the things that the kids had thought were so atrocious that they had never forgiven them for. And he said, in one of the gentlemen, the story went that he saw what he had caused, the hurt it had actually caused that he thought wasn't hurt because the entity never mentioned it. And he started to feel accountable for that. And he started to account for it by simply saying, oh, I caused that. I was there. I did that. That was my interaction that happened. He was seeing it now wholly, Michael, not as cause, but cause effect. It was simultaneous. And he started to forgive himself. He started to see that the things he had held against others were things he had done rather than things he thought they had done to him. And it started to vanish. The forgiveness started to come. And he said, the one thing I was left with was my own unforgiveness for the things I had done. And he said, as I simply witnessed that and watched it, a sense of love, a sense of complete belonging, a sense of welcome, a sense of wholeness melted the bounds of that completely. And he began to realize what he'd never forgiven was his own actions in his own life. And it's exactly what the steps are designed to do. Steps are designed to remove the obstacles that stand in the way of the sunlight of the spirit. Now, I would say we can't stand in the way of it, but we can certainly think we do. And we can certainly diminish our life's capacity by imagining that we do. And the book is actually moving us from full self-centeredness to a state of being that we could actually practice principles in all our affairs and allow the real will and the real power to be expressed through us rather than constantly make believe it's a conclusion made by us. So these experiences, interestingly enough, mirror the vital spiritual experience that Carl Jung referred to as being critical to recovery, something that Bill Wilson picked up early on that led to his expansion of the steps and his understanding of the importance of the steps and the way that he outlined them. And the question is, if that awareness is ever present, why is it that we need to be challenged by death to overcome the bounds of the thinking? Because clearly in all these instances, one of the guys saw he'd run into a plane had crashed. He was an Air Force fireman or something, and he'd gone to the site and the plane blew up and he was very near it. And the next thing he noticed was his friends that had come later than he did, that were not there for the explosion, were moving a body, and he wanted to go help them move the body. And as he sat there, he realized it was his body that they were moving. So the clarity, one of the guys said that he felt like his thoughts were clearer than they'd ever been, multiple times clearer. The knowingness was very clear. The awareness was very clear. And not only was he clear about what he was doing, but everybody else too. Very interesting. That would be an all-knowing presence, I would say. Why is it we need near-death experiences to get beyond our imagined self? Because I would say one thing the doctor pointed out also was that people who had predictable deaths were suffering a process, didn't tend to have this same life review in the same way because they had time to review their life. And the people who were caught off guard unexpectedly seemed to have this consistent pattern of having this review of life go on in front of them, which tells me we don't forget anything. Everything that has ever happened has made an impact on us. It is memorable. We know what it is. We don't have to think we know what it is to know what it is. If, in fact, once we're beyond the thinking we're doing, it becomes obvious that we're very clear about those things that happened. As a matter of fact, we're so clear about it that we not only see it from our point of view, but everyone else's too. And that is the transition between subjective thoughts, self-centered, and objectivity, beginning to combine the two as one and see that what I'm doing alone is not impacting just me. It's impacting everything and everyone. And to miss that point would be unforgivable, to live a life holding everyone and everyone else, everything and everyone else responsible for what I've done the whole time. It would seem unforgivable within the context of that thinking. So why wait? Is the question. Why is it when we are incomprehensibly demoralized, it means we can't even comprehend the demoralization, which seems to be the thing that leads us to a point where we finally admit a bottom is at hand. And I would suggest we're always at the bottom if we can always look up. There's always more within, to your point, Loretta, there's always more within a human experience that I can express if I have been limiting it. It isn't because I am not that source and not doing that, and I'm not being that being. It's because I simply haven't utilized my functional capacity honestly enough to begin expressing those things. And I have been depressed about that and felt guilty for doing that and ashamed for lacking that in what I have been giving to others the whole time. It is not a surprise. It is not new. It is an absolute constant state of awareness. And that awareness is all bound to the thinking. If we can begin to concede that I don't need to think about an absolute presence, and I don't need to trust in that presence, and I don't need to have faith in that presence for it to be present, it all of a sudden stops my thinking about it being based on thought and starts to allow me to witness the knowing of it has always been my present state of knowing awareness. Jack Kerouac said, the enlightened man knows he's always been enlightened. That's the ultimate awareness, is to see that we're all there. We're all part of this. We all know we know. We're aware we're aware. It is not a place to get to or go. All those functional, dimensional, spatial things are human things. They're not being things. Beings aren't present because they show up when we get somewhere. They're present because they don't exist in space and time. So they are found everywhere in space and time. They are in every thought, every molecule, and everything that is the essence of, that is still the essence of those things. It's not separate from us. MK.
Well, that's something else he talks about is as he's having in the book, as they're going back and forth and having this discussion, the thing that he brings up, I don't remember what exactly it was, but he responds with your concerns or your problems are related to your body.
Yes.
They're just body issue, hunger, shelter. They're just things that you are conscious of or concerned about that you need for your body to survive. But now you're taking it beyond that. And now it's all these other things that you're just overutilizing your ability to think. It's not survival anymore. It's what you both just are thinking you should be thinking about.
Well, the irony of it, Michael, is that the inability to recognize that imposition that we create actually is killing the same body we claim to be saving. That's the insanity of it. Insanity is always going to create the result that it claims not to be wanting. It's always going to, the promise is always going to be broken. So what's the promise of a lie? That it's never going to be true. But what's the promise of a lie? Someday it will come true. That's the promise we continue to maintain in our corrupt thinking. If my systems are all stressed under the weight of that thinking, every single thing I do, including my cells, are impaired in their ability to function naturally because I'm imposing an unnatural concept. And interesting in the point you're making about the bodily functions, our body language are the feelings we have about all the information that we're processing, and the feelings are consequences of the thinking we're doing. Our feelings are giving us some perspective of the thinking we often say we can't see because I can't see my thoughts or my feelings. And yet we notice their effects. And the doctor we've made that point here for the last year. The doctor made that point clear. Even at the subatomic level of all that is misunderstood and not yet understood in physics, what they have discovered, which is probably 100 years old, is that, or maybe a little less, but if they engage those things that seem to be invisible, they can follow the effects of what those things do to get a better sense of what those things are. We have those effects in our body to give us the impressions that we're creating in thoughts, to give us perspective, to give us distance, to give us that's our body language. And to think it's a foreign language is insane because it speaks to us in perfectly accurate terms, giving us absolute credible information. And what do we do in addictive thinking? Think we need to get over it and get away from it because it's uncomfortable. So we're striving for comfort by maintaining discomfort. That's insanity. There's a collision there. It isn't healthy. It's unnatural. And as you look, the problems you have are inevitably going to be tracked back to the thinking you're doing about the thing. It isn't to say you have any obligation to like the thing that's happening. You have none whatsoever. But what's interesting is when we deny the thinking we're doing, we tend to be engaged with more things we don't like as a result. Once again, showing how preposterous it is that we think we're going to win this battle when we think there's a battle to win. It's simply a thought posing as reality and truth that we're always contending with. And why would that be the case if we had any faith in reality and truth, or any trust in reality and truth? It wouldn't occur. The fact is, it's an indication of our lack of faith and our lack of trust. And what do? Have more faith and trust in what's absolutely impossible, a lie coming true, than we do in actually something that's faithful and trustworthy. And what's interesting again about faith and trust, just like applying 2 + 2 is 4, I don't need to think about it once I apply it anymore. I don't need to be faithful all the time once I've actually done it and realize I've been relying on it the whole time. It hasn't been based on what I thought. It's been based on my essence. It's the essence of my being that actually knows that. It doesn't mean I think that in my own human experience. Feeling disconnected is an accurate assessment of thoughts that have no place. They have no reality. They have no denominator, while we heap the numerator with more and more and more and more and more and more thought, thinking someday it'll work. Impossible is impossible because it's impossible. A lie will never be true because the irony is, if a lie is a lie, it is true. As soon as you admit it's a lie, there's nothing there. There's no fight. There's no need to maintain it. There's no need to tell it. There's no need to prove it. No need to fight for it. It goes away. Just like when I admitted I was powerless over alcohol, that was sort of a no shit moment. Of course I had been. Like, no kidding. Who was the joke on? Me. Who was the jokester? Me. Who was embarrassed about being seen as a clown? Me. Because I was parading as a fool. Foolish thoughts rushed in to seemingly save a self that had no basis.
You know,
Where
sobering.
angels feared to tread. Loretta?
Well, sobering up, to me, living in sobriety, I do not try. Let me take that out. I am becoming a cleaner vessel to be available. You know, in other words, I don't want all of this. It's not that I don't want, I say the wrong words in here, but I'm going to say them like I say them. Okay. I am trying to keep my vessel clean by doing the 4th step, realizing these things that are blocking the light, that are blocking growth, that I can change. I don't have to be that way anymore. I don't have to be resentful or angry. And so to me, that's like cleaning out your vessel to become more available to be of use in a better way. I think it's very simple.
But in doing that, you're admitting that it's only the dirty thoughts you have you need to clean. And the question would be, what is it about your thinking that would allow you to continue to clutter a space that's perfectly clean?
Well,
and the point I make in correcting words, Loretta, the point I make in correcting words is words reflect our thinking. And I struggle in my attempt to say these things clearly enough. But I know that people know what they know, and I know that if they know what they know, I don't need to say it perfectly clear, but the clearer I do my best to say it, the closer I may get to an awareness that someone who already knows what they know at least can shake their head and say, I don't have to understand it to recognize I know it, and start to distinguish the difference between our understanding and our thinking, because the understanding and reason is a function of thought, not reality and truth, because there is no reason in what's reasonable or what reality and truth are. There's only reason to what's reasonable and only logic to what's logical. And thinking as a functional capacity of humans functions in those realms. It doesn't function in an absolute sense until we start allowing the absolute to be expressed through it rather than it seeming to conclude it for us. So I stress the words because they reveal the thinking. And my sense is the steps are a process that are taken by people who are extremely self-centered to start with, and given an experience to begin to see that they can wake up to what they're doing, and they can be clear in that awakening because they will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle them. The ultimate guidance is to see that in that state of light, the light's never been obstructed, but to the thinking I was doing about the light. If I'm trying to maintain the thinking right all the time, I'm denying the rightness of my knowing. And the thinking's obviously going to continue to struggle day in and day out, trying to get there, rather than just concede, I'm already there, I just don't think I'm there. And start to have it become an obvious conversation with ourself, so that when I refer to I'm not referring to the thinking I'm doing all the time. I'm beginning to refer to the essence that we all share, that I know you have, and I know you are, regardless of what I think, and the limits of my ideas and thoughts, and regardless as a result of what anyone thinks, and the limits of their ideas and thoughts. This is a comprehensive conversation, or an attempt at doing what can't be done in words, but is already done in its entirety based on an absolute concept. If that's all it is a concept, and it works and provides any relief, I would say it would be worth employing.
Well,
because it's already
when you're
employed us.
Right. Well, I will say for myself that I'm not on the bridge of reason anymore, because reason is not my God anymore. I jumped over to the promised land and did take a leap of faith. And a leap of faith involves trust. And I think trust is the biggest freedom. Yes. Trust is the biggest freedom I have ever found.
The biggest problem, though, Loretta, is that we've been taking a leap of faith our whole life that someday this thought we have about who we think we are will come true.
But we have had. But see, I'm not on the bridge of reason anymore.
Okay.
It talks about we agnostics.
Okay.
So when you're no longer on the bridge of reason and you've taken everything over, you don't have to go back and get anything else.
But when you're not on the bridge, you'll see it was never a bridge anyhow, and there is no reason, and there's an so
we agnostics, it's a bridge.
Yeah.
It's a saying.
Got it.
So that's what I'm referring to.
Yes. So MK, in that book, you might want to hold it up again because Jackie's here now, and LA and I believe Sturgis is still, I think Sturgis was here when you did it again. It's called I Am That. It's an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
And it was published back in the 70s, I think, wasn't it? Can you give me
you read it?
Give me the publishing date, MK.
I got through it. It was published in the 70s. That's right, I believe, at least. And then I think it's interestingly had, I think it's been updated, or I think there's like a new preface or something. I don't know.
So like the one I have right now is 3rd edition, 2012, first published in 1982.
Oh, 82.
He passed in 81.
Amazing.
But I think it was written back in the 70s. It must have been, but it may have been republished also. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's
copyright was 73.
73. Right. Yeah, that's what I thought it was. So
I read it, interestingly enough, in high school. Like it was it was one of the, when I first, I mean, it's amazing, right? Like what evidence of knowing already, but I read The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, which is now a movie, and that
wasn't that Dan, what's his name?
Exactly. Millman, maybe? I don't know. But yes,
yeah,
Dan
he was up in San Francisco.
Yes. And that, to my 15, 16-year-old brain just absolutely blew it open. And from there, I just started devouring, all of the things I could find around the themes that he, was making pretty simple. And I think, frankly, for an audience like, me at that age. And I probably understood it better then than I did the second time I read it, which was about 5 or 6 years ago.
Dan Millman.
There's a handful of movies I want to rewatch as I've aged.
Yeah,
That's probably going to be much different.
There is a passage in The Way of the Peaceful Warrior that I'll find for you. I mean, it kind of just sums it all up. I was amazed. Yeah, I don't know much about Dan Millman. I did at the time, but Jack, maybe you have a little bit more of his history there. I remember just being absolutely, I mean, that was it for me. I figured I'd kind of pack it in.
I think I read it the year it came out, and I forget his story, but I know he was up in San Francisco and had quite an experience and was able to convey it. I don't even know that he was a writer, but I think he got it out really well. And what's interesting is this conversation has been held for a long time. Things have been considered for a long time. My suspicion is this one addictive aspect of it has not been considered, is to see that when we engage thoughts that are not true as true, we will create a reactive environment that appears to be impossible to overcome as long as we maintain any of those thoughts and maintain our commitment to them being true, rather than simply see that whirling dervish as evidence that we're up to something that's no good. It's simply not true. And to start noticing that is to start to notice that the limits of our thought are actually the beginning of everything else, and also include everything else, because we can't think of something as exclusive from an absolute presence. But that's where the adventure begins, is starting to consider these things rather than think our security begins by defending the limits of those things. It's the real adventure, is saying, wow, I can be as wrong as I could possibly be, and there's no impact. I've been wrong most of the time, the whole time, thinking I was right. That's insane. No wonder I feel stressed. No wonder my neck cracks like it's glass when I move it in the right direction. Of course, I've been building tension my whole life and thinking that tension was my fight, my resolve, when in fact it's just been a battery that's overcharged and is actually impairing my ability to actually express energy in a productive, meaningful way.
And I love the word adventure, because to me, that's where your awareness becomes.
Yes.
An adventure.
Yes. Yeah. And it's an exploration.
It is.
Life would become very different from that seeming point of view, but actually present state of being, than thinking of it as something limited in any way, because the idea of it being limited is to completely undermine the whole point of what life is.
Exactly. That's how I look at life. It is an adventure now.
I'm not always a good listener, Loretta, so
Well,
I have perfect hearing, but I'm listening impaired.
I think you're very simple.
I don't know how to take that.
Well, that's a compliment, because when you
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
That's a high compliment, Jack.
Well, the beauty of simplicity is that it does not change, so that it's always reliable, it's always trustworthy, it's always faithful, it's always hopeful. But there is no hope in it. There is no trust in it. That is just doing what it knows to do, because it is what it is. And there is no lack, and there is no anything that we would consider to be a depreciated value whatsoever in that absolute state of being that we are all sharing with everyone else and everything else right now, everywhere. There are
So
people
if I sit in my garage for 3 hours a day, does that mean I'm a car or not a car?
It may, given that you're asking the question. It may seem like it, Anthony. So when the doors fall off, let me know.
I'll save you the trouble. You're definitely a car. Just stop there.
That's Anthony.
What kind of car am I, Sturgis?
Anthony, you're kind of driving a car where you've got the gas pedal floored and you're controlling its forward motion with the brake.
Well, I'd like to get in that car with you, Anthony. I'll go.
You got to. I was thinking about that garage spot. I'm like, I could be renting that garage spot.
So on the heels,
What is the deal with the garage spot? What does that mean?
Garages are hard to get. I admire. I've got envy of your garage there, but that's a different subject.
Well,
I was just making the point that just because you're sitting in a garage, it doesn't mean you're a car. Just because you think you're doing something doesn't mean it's really true.
Well, that's true.
well, I would suggest if you have to think about it, it can't be true.
I have an adventurous garage.
But it is an important point. Just because what you think, if you think it is that, doesn't really make it that so. Just because you're confident, you're 100% sure, doesn't mean that that's what it is.
Very good.
Another
And
thing
yet-
he talks a lot about is consider what you are not. Because the part of the conversation was he was just talking about all these things he is, and I'm this, and I'm this, and I'm this, and he's like, how about you just start considering what you are not, and using that as a guiding system. And like
Well,
you
and
just said,
yet-
you're not a car.
Well,
Yeah,
so having
you-
the willingness to be
You,
wrong.
by identifying the one, are identifying the other as the contrast to the thing you're identifying. If you follow me.
Mhm.
If you're claiming you're a car, if you're seeing a car as a molecular structure that's intimately tied to the entire universe, you're not seeing it as something separate and distinct. When you see it as a car, you're actually claiming all of the other things that it is not, so you can distinguish it. That's exactly what we think our thinking does when we think our thinking is true, by identifying who we are while not noticing that it means that we aren't anything else but that.
Bingo.
So
Mhm.
that's where cause and effect, seeing the opposites is the same, is seeing that they all share common ground. Here's another point that I think is really interesting about that near-death thing. In the book, it says we were taken to a place of neutrality. So think of that. We were taken. Didn't happen under our own volition. We didn't get there. We were taken to a place of our own validity, of our own of seeming reality. We were taken to a place of neutrality. And then I think it says where, let me get it really quick, because it's really worth noting, because these near-death experiences were really speaking to this point. The pressure has helped me forget. My own ideas of the pressure has helped me forget. But on page 85, it says, we will find that this has happened. It says we react sanely when it comes to alcohol. We react sanely. What does that mean? We don't decide to drink again thinking it's a solution. And normally, and we will find it, we don't react, we react sanely and normally. What's normal? Sanity. And we will find this has happened automatically. Why? Because we don't have to do anything about it. What we stopped doing was the thing that gave us the other impression. Loretta, to your point, this is important. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. What does that mean? We conceded something to our innermost self that we have no control over, no power over. It's the same thing as a lie. If I admit that, I start seeing that all my interbulation, all my disruptions, all my discomfort, all my discouraging, shameful, guilty actions are based on something that is not true. That's the essence of the mental state. It says no effort on our part. It just comes. Why? Because it's always been there. I have been obstructing with my own claims of reality and my own thinking about reality, my witness of reality. It isn't that reality wasn't there, it's that I simply wasn't witnessing it because I thought I was witnessing my own version of it, my own self-centered version. This is the miracle of it, it says. We are not fighting it. Neither are we avoiding temptation. This is to this point about how do we stop this thinking. We feel as though we have been placed. We feel as though we have been placed. The sensation is we're just given a place that we've never been and yet feel perfectly at home because it says we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. It's exactly what the people in their near-death experiences described. One of them said that he was in a tunnel of light, changing light, like the aurora borealis lights. And he could sense that there were beings, family members, lineage, history all around him. And the tunnel was a funnel like a hurricane or a tornado or a cyclone or a drain spinning, cycling, getting narrower and narrower. And there was a light. And he said, I knew there were beings there, but I couldn't look because I was transfixed on the light. All I could see was the light. And he said, it seemed so far away, but it took no time to get there. Interesting. They're describing they're all now conscious again, describing something that's indescribable and trying to use words to talk about a knowing present state of being that isn't in time and isn't in space and seems to happen simultaneously right now. They're witnessing it. They're talking about it in words that can't quite describe it, but do a pretty good job of talking about the fact that time has no impact, that space has no impact, that the immediacy of it, the ever-present nature of it is present. And we do not need to create near-death experiences to witness this any more than we need to continue to create and use drugs and alcohol and any compulsive behavior to prove that we may not want to consider what we're actually thinking, ever. It's choice. It is a choice. And when it is a choice we make, it's a sick choice because it's based on something we don't think we're thinking that's motivating us. And to begin to concede that we're thinking a lot that we don't think we're thinking is an interesting mantra, because in my experience, I started to become aware is that I actually know exactly what I don't think I'm thinking when I finally begin to admit that I'm responsible for the thinking I'm doing I don't think I'm doing. When I begin to actually become accountable and responsible for what I'm doing in every way, in all ways, and just think that even when I don't believe it and don't have faith in it, because all my faith and trust and belief and hope has been in things that are faithless and trustless and unbelievable and hopeless, because I've been thinking it's my thinking I will straighten out someday, and it isn't true. Can't be true. It's impossible. So there is no impossibility in an absolute state of being because it is the essence of all possibility. Lies only live in our brains, human brains. They don't seem to be in animal brains. Animals don't seem to be masquerading, rhinoceroses don't seem to become hippopotamuses. Now, I'm leaving room for that possibility, but it hasn't, I don't think, happened yet. So in that neutrality, that place we're seemingly taken to, it's showing it. There's no effort in this at all. There's absolutely no work to do in that realization. It doesn't mean we don't have functional capacities to develop by introducing this to our thinking. But if we think our thinking is going to get us there, we're once again engaging in the same thing that created the impression that we're not there. And we're going to continue to make believe we need to be somewhere else, we need to have something else, and we need to be with someone else. These are all natural consequences of the idea that I'm not where I am. And the fulfillment of all this is to see we're always where we are. We always have everything, that what's happening is in fact happening. I started to say for everyone listening right now who isn't listening while this is being recorded, we too are present with you in the listening you're doing in some way, somewhere, somehow, based on the fact that we are all absolutely intimately connected. There is no division in any of this whatsoever. It doesn't mean we can't think of it as divided. It does not mean we can't think irresponsibly. It does not mean we can't go wrong. It means we are free to do all of those things. And when we are free to admit we are doing those things, we will not be condemned by any of them and will take advantage of the enormous information they provide naturally, because they are evidence of the information that's causing the impact that they're having. They will be guidance systems, just like GPS is. I noticed on the Apple Maps, the newer Apple Maps, that they do not have street names in between the place you're going. And I always want to know the streets I'm crossing and where I am because I want to get a logistical reference. I've been in LA too long not to want to know the streets I'm on and how to get places that avoid traffic. But they don't give you the street names and all that because they don't clutter up the whole thing. They're just telling you where you want to go. You gave it an address, they say, here, go here, make a left there. And the main streets become obvious when you get there. But if I'm always trying to look ahead, like what are these small blocks in between here? I want more information. But the simplicity of it is it's GPS. It's just telling me where I asked to go. And it's the same in my own system. I'm getting all of that feedback that I don't like and is uncomfortable and unnatural as information that's a guidance system to the exploration and the adventure of beginning to notice that I'm always interacting with things as they're happening, not as I think they're happening. And if I think things shouldn't be happening, it's only what I'm thinking about them that shouldn't be happening, that I'm thinking. It's only the impact I'm having by what I think, not the things. The things are giving me good information. Let's go where you don't even think you're capable of going. Let's explore the possibilities that are possible that you don't even think are possible by going the direction that you're actually going rather than the one you think you should go. Let's start participating at a level that includes participation rather than only the participation I think I like and want. When in fact, I always want what I don't even like if I'm interested in actually engaging with it. If it's happening, I must be interested enough to be happening with it, to have it happen. However things are going, I'm part of beyond the simple, narrow view I have about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, what I should be doing and where I should be going and how I should be looking when I get there and all that stuff. Things are not as they appear. They are not as they seem. Things are as they are, no matter how they appear and how they seem. How I appear to people is irrelevant because every time I think I'm going to promote some idea, I generally find out people don't think of me that way at all. Just like a lie, it's an invisibility that I'm never going to perfect, while truth and reality is always indivisible. And while it seems unseen, it's ever present and always known and always recognized.
You know, it's almost like when you get to the point of just knowing yourself well enough, you are who you are. I have recognized I cannot be anything else of who anybody wants me to be. I'm just who I am and stand firm in that. So I've gotten to a point of recognizing that I am not going to please everyone. I can't. So what I'm trying to say is,
well, you could.
It doesn't matter to me anymore. It's not interesting for me to want to please everyone or look a certain way or have everyone like me because I don't care. It's not interesting to me anymore. Does that make sense?
Yes. And the only reason we're concerned about what other people think is because we're concerned about what we're thinking about what other people think. And that whole thing feeds, huh?
If you don't care about what other people think, you're not thinking about it.
Well, why are you even talking about it then?
It's just a point. I was agreeing with you. It's just a point.
I want to make a point, though, that the only reason we're ever concerned about what other people think is because we're concerned about what we're thinking.
No.
And we're promoting appearances from our own experience that we are concerned they may see are fraudulent. Because if we were expressing truth and reality, we wouldn't be concerned with what they were thinking because they would be witnessing truth and reality with us simultaneously and confirming the absolute knowing nature of all of our existence rather than trying to confirm the individuation of a self that doesn't exist.
Well, I can only change myself and be myself. I can't change anyone else. So I'm not really interested.
Everybody else is already changing, so that's accomplished.
Exactly.
In terms of their thinking.
Right. So I'm at a place where I don't really care what other people think. I'm not trying to impress or do anything. I wear sunglasses. It's okay. All right.
Yeah. Those are all things we're free to do.
Right.
All of them. And so too with the consequences that will come. We ask for the consequences by the actions we take. We don't have to think they're coming for them to come because they will be identical reflection of the thinking we're doing. Always.
True.
Always.
True. That's why blondes in Texas, when blondes don't have eye makeup on, hey, maybe next time they will.
Well, I'm not wearing mine and I still have sunglasses on. My old blonde hair and blue eyes are very sensitive to light, and I'm in a very bright room in the morning.
Me too. Mine are too.
So if we share this, we share it. If it's absolute, it's absolute. If it's true, it's true. If it's real, it's real. Those are things that can be not necessarily mantras, but if they're actually thought of during times of disturbance, it can quell the disturbance because it's a focus on something that's actually happening, because truth and reality are always happening, and help relieve the ideas that we're creating and the obsessive nature of the thinking that we're launching. And it isn't so much a salve, but a simple reminder that when we act in accordance with things as they are, we're aligned. We are not maligned in our thinking. We naturally flow. We naturally know. We naturally have a sense of things well beyond the thinking we can ever do. And now thinking is actually sensitive enough, being allowed to be what it is in relation to truth and reality. So it has the potential of expressing truth and reality rather than a self-centered preoccupation with thinking about thinking.
When did stop being what everybody wanted you to be, not stop working for you, Loretta? You said that you go, I'm tired of that. That sounded like you tried it and it didn't work. Is that right?
I think everybody tries it all the time. I don't think it's just me. But what I'm saying is, when to answer your question, when I started realizing who I am, and that was enough.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds like a moment of clarity.
I don't know if it was a moment of, well, maybe it was. I don't know.
Yeah, you could put down the beach ball. You're not on a beach ball pretending like nothing's on under the water.
Right.
You're trying to keep a beach ball down. You haven't used that analogy for a while, Jack. I like that one, where you're trying to hold a beach ball down, right? Is that kind of the similar?
It's too cold in LA to consider the beach. It's been
But I love that.
44 degrees
that
last night. We're struggling to dress.
I love that feeling that Loretta described. Like I breathe easier, where it's like I just can't. It's not that you don't want to, or not. You just can't anymore. Just can't. It's just too much work.
Anthony, you notice that she's relating and you're relating to the ease of it and the effortless of that sentence at the beginning of page 85. We're taken to a place of neutrality. There's no fight in neutrality. It's a state of being. That center point of neutrality between good and bad, between right and wrong and all that stuff is the present state of being that we're always witnessing. There's perfect balance in it because it can't be out of balance when you're at the center of everything. The thing we're trying to center the self in is centered only in thought that's constantly changing. The only reason we keep the self at the center is because it's the furthest thing from the limit of those thoughts, the furthest thing from the edge, because we're afraid that the thought process we're doing is single dimensional, because it's only trying to make the point that who we are is what we think. So we're living on a flat earth, literally, and afraid that if we approach the horizon of the thought, we're going to fall off the edge. And that's the the fear that it talks about in the book is being self-reliance. Self-centered fear is fear of being anywhere but at the center of our thoughts. So all we're doing is thinking about a self that we think of and that we think obsessively of, because if we stop thinking about it, that self doesn't exist. It has no basis. It's only coming from the recurring nature of making believe that we are the creators of truth and reality, rather than seeing that we are a byproduct of truth and reality, and we are as much a part of reality and truth as anything or anyone could ever be. So there's no lack of fulfillment in that, except for the ideas we have that are contrary to that. And then we're only insane to imagine they have any basis at all. It's exactly what the second step is about. Came to believe in a power greater than us. What does that mean? Beyond the limits of our thinking. That's all. We're considering, could there be something greater than my thinking? Maybe. Okay, that's enough. Could it help me in this problem? Could it help? If I begin to actually rely on it, could it help me? Of course it could help you. It's all the help there is when it comes to essence. And so I begin to consider things beyond those limits and all of a sudden realize, of course, there's something greater. Of course, I've always known that. I have been insane to believe that somehow the limits of my own thinking are the totality of reality and truth. And sobriety is about sanity. Emotional sobriety is about sane living. Sane living, by the way, is not insane. So, because insanity is a delusion. It's an illusion. It's a lie making believe it's true, or that it even can be true, just as the idea of a greater power than us, if we just consider it may be true, is enough because it is true. The impossibility of considering a lie may be true confirms the impossibility of the lie, because it will never be true, no matter how many times it's applied. That's what addiction is. Constantly trying to reapply the same salve and thinking it's a solution, when in fact it's actually cementing, reinforcing the problem by the repetitious thinking about it. So what I do in correcting words, Loretta, and anyone else, is just know that we're speaking in terms, and we have through history, that basically conspires to hide what we're doing when in fact it's all in plain sight. And if we look at it honestly, the words start straightening out because our thinking starts straightening out. And as long as our thinking is sick, we're going to say things to complement that thinking that reinforce the thinking that's sick, rather than begin to unravel it by noticing the words as evidence of what we're thinking and asking, can that be true? Is that possible that that's even true? Can I have no other choice? Is that possible when I always have the choice not to choose? When I could always take another breath? That would disprove that immediately, that I have no obligation to operate on those sick thoughts, that I know the impending doom I'm witnessing is going to come if I continue to pursue the thought. It's telling me, it's giving me the evidence. And what do I want to do? Feel better than it in some way.
However, back to step 2, with what you were saying about step 2, if you know and decide to have that trust right there, 100% trust in something that is greater than you, then I think step 3 is where you can surrender. You have something to surrender to because you have that trust. I missed that. I missed the words of trust and faith, they both being the same thing.
Yeah.
So when I used the word trust, because see, I could always have faith. I had that car accident and I was healed. So I could always have faith because I knew. But trusting is a whole different ballgame to me, because when you trust, you know, you don't have to think, you know that you've trusted, you've made that decision, you've given that, your thoughts and will and all that crap over to another power to let drive your car. I mean, that's how I feel. That's what happened to me. And when I let that drive my car, it's when it says in the book, I begin to recoil like a hot flame from addiction itself.
Yeah.
But
does it say begin to recoil or recoil? I like begin to recoil better.
I began to recoil. Yeah.
So an infinite source doesn't require trust or hope or faith or anything, agreement. But our thinking, when we're thinking of something that is trustworthy and faithful and hopeful, because it actually doesn't need hope, because it actually always is what it is, all of a sudden eliminates the process. And the process we're talking about now, because we're focusing on the mental obsession, is seeing that after the freedom comes from the addiction, the clarity of the problem becomes more certain, because we're no longer using that curative, restorative prescription that we used to use to try to cover it up, and all of a sudden are witnessing face first the misery, the functional incapacity, the interrelational issues, the financial, fiscal irresponsibility. Any of those things that we are party to and involved in become clear very quickly. So too does the longing and the internal dialogue and the hatred and the loathing and that self-imposition of fear, that self-induced state of anxiety and stress. It all becomes obvious. And while we are free from the symptom, the freedom is offering us a clear view of the deeper issue, which is the thinking. And that's what we're talking about here. And why I can be insistent in my own repetition of those points, to remind you as you're thinking of those things and launching those boats that are going to sink, that you can take them as far as you want. You don't have to get them to the bottom of the ocean to say, oh, bailing water is no longer going to help, because they're already there. The hopelessness is immediate. The hopelessness isn't eventual. It isn't when we eventually finally come to terms with it, when we finally agree that we're at a bottom. That's just a vain attempt in the whole time to make denial possible, when in fact we've been using denial to postpone the inevitability of our awareness that we've known the whole time something is wrong in what we're doing. We don't need to go down that road. And my sense is this near-death experience is giving us the chance to realize we are fully capable of witnessing on a daily, momentary basis exactly what these people seem to notice only when they get pushed beyond, so drastically beyond the bounds of their own thinking. We can do that where we are, and sobriety has been doing that for 100 years almost, by giving people perspective on their involvement and our part and seeing things clearly. But the layer of clarity comes from the thinking about the thinking and starting to see thinking is not determining reality at all. It isn't reality. It is simply a function of reality. It is a product of reality. It is something that we do. It is not something we are. So if I'm treating the self, I'm trying to feel better about a self that has no basis other than what I think. And it isn't to suggest that I cannot think about myself or my thinking. But when I'm thinking about myself is what I'm thinking, that's a very different experience than thinking about myself as it's thinking, as who I am and what I need to fight for and appear to be and seem to be. Very different experience to simply let it be what it is. It's thinking of itself. Well, it isn't who I am. It's something I'm doing. Just like raising and waving an arm is something I do. Perfectly capable. If I did this all day to prove I existed, I don't think I would be taken that seriously in all other respects. People would say things like, what the fuck are you doing? I'd say, I'm proving I'm an arm. I'm an arm. Don't you see? Proves I exist.
What about going to self-care,
Well, so what greater self-care could there be than notice that the self you are is shared with everyone, and the thinking you do in relation to everyone is the thinking you'll do in relation to that self you think you are?
Well, if you're anorexic, you could start eating.
Yes. Well, but when you're healthy mentally, you'll do those things automatically, just like you've been breathing the whole time. We don't tend to breathe very deeply, and yet it's required for our body. We don't tend to drink really good water, yet it's required for our body. We don't tend to eat good quality food, yet it's required for healthy nutrition. Those are all things that are optional. And the sense is we start making sense and realize we don't even have to make sense because sense has already been made for us, and it's been feeding us perfectly accurate information all along. And we've been refusing to listen to the information it's been giving. Our body language is perfectly written for each of us to know immediately. It's accurate all the time. When I feel less than, I am thinking thoughts that are less than all I could be thinking.
Right.
They're accurate assessments. To feel less than and think I need to take a seminar in self-confidence is to start giving the self credit for even existing, to have confidence, when in fact it's fine for me to think about my thoughts, but to think of that self as who I am should have no confidence because it isn't who I am. There's nothing in it that's a lie.
Right. It's almost like your mind just untangles to what is natural to do. It is natural to drink water because your body needs it. It's natural to eat because your body needs that for fuel. But let me tell you, it's a freedom to have that entangled.
Yes. Well,
see, it's funny you say that, Loretta, because I can't even tell you how many people I speak to on a daily basis, like, oh, I don't even know the last time I drank a glass of water. It completely exhausts their bodies. I fill this 10 times a day, and I'm sitting at work and they see me drinking water and they're like, oh man, I need to drink more of that. So like, there's this weird complexity that we know it, but to do it, or to at least acknowledge the fact that you're not doing it, as if that's validating some odd.
If something so fundamental is even in question, isn't it pretty good indication that we're not thinking very straight and that we're mired in decades and centuries and millennia of thoughts that have become so common as to think they're common when healing is uncommon and unnatural, when in fact healing is common and what's unnatural is actually uncommon. We've twisted and perverted our own sense of our own experience. Same with food.
Wait, hold on a minute. I want to say something because you was asking me. It's as simple as having a cup with water in it next to you. That's
to who is that simple?
I would think, well, it has been for me because I used to drink Coke all the time, but I decided to place a cup of water next to me. But I didn't think about it. I just
How many Cokes are you still drinking a day? I'm just curious.
Well, yesterday I drank 2 because I had this glass of water in this Yeti cup, so it keeps it cold. So I just normally drink that. I'm not thinking about a Coke. I just want something that is liquid.
But Loretta, what you're really saying though, too, is that when you decided to do something healthy, you naturally knew exactly what to do. It would seem almost too simple to
It
even
was.
have to mention that having water available might be helpful if you're interested in drinking water.
That's right.
But think of how perverted we get in our thinking to think that there could be any complexity to it
There's
at
no
all. There isn't any. The nature of health is natural. The nature of nature is natural. As our thinking straightens out, we'll no longer be we'll intuitively know what to do.
exactly, and
We will no longer be baffled. We will
and
intuitively know what to do with things that
Exactly.
used to baffle us.
right, and I'm not concerned about who's not drinking water. I don't notice them.
Well, no one ever drank a glass of water that quenched my thirst.
I mean, I
So
don't know what's
it
supposed
sort of shows how immediate our experience is to recognize that how we're functioning in our thinking is how well we're going to be functioning with our body. And if our body's dysfunctioning, we're helping the entire species dysfunction. And we're using our own incapacity to blame them rather than notice the incapacity we're creating. And I started to say about food, if you eat healthy food, like food grown from the earth that wasn't poisoned, there's a much greater tendency of eating an amount that's satisfying because your body knows it's gotten what it needs and shuts off the appetite thing. Most of what we eat, and a big percentage of what's in grocery stores, doesn't even qualify under the definition of food within the FDA. When we eat things that aren't healthy, it creates a craving. Why? Because the body's saying, thanks, now feed me. Thanks, now feed me. Thanks, now feed me. Thanks, now feed me. What does that sound like? Drinkers. Why is the solution never enough? Because I'm not even addressing the problem. I'm trying to fix it with something that has no connection to the problem except for the dysfunctional thinking that's thinking if I do more of it, it will be somehow enough. And when enough is never enough, words have completely fallen apart and lost their meaning. So has sense. And that's exactly what addiction is. So it conveys in all respects and all ways to all things we do, not just the things that are so notable addictions. It includes the expectations we have of other people to think certain things and have certain ideas about us. It includes the ideas we have about oncoming traffic when we're crossing the street and jaywalking. It's not a guarantee that people are going to do what they think they're going to do. They're going to do what they do, not what I think they should do.
Well, the thing about water for me is that, boy, I mean, you best have a bathroom near because, you know, you pee a lot more than if you drink Coke. So,
You know what? If you have an empty glass, you can never spill either. So yes, the two come together. So you see the cause and effect. You do something, it has an effect. And you know what urine is? Basically, it's a purification. I mean, we'll talk about shit and urine for a second. The urine is actually taking out everything that's not useful in your body. It's helping get the impurities out of your body. When we cause tension, we cause constipation. That constipation is actually stuff our body's designed to get rid of, and it backs up into our system because it's not being evacuated. So the bacteria and all that stuff starts to have the same thing that sepsis, shock, and whatever else has in our intestines and can start to bleed back into our bodily systems. It's not healthy, and it's all coming from stress. What is stress? Anxiety, caused largely by thinking. If we are anxious about something that's happening, we will do something about that thing happening immediately. When we are anxious in our thinking, we will continue to think about it and think about it and think about it and think about it, thinking we will resolve it while we end up perpetuating it, and have probably done that most of our lives. So our bodies are good examples of the deteriorated effect of healing because we have actually continued to impose poisonous, toxic thoughts on it and wonder why bodies don't heal as quickly as they could or should, are designed to. Bodies are designed to heal. They're designed to maintain balance. We throw them out of balance by the things we do to them. It's not our body that's struggling. It's the thinking we're doing about the body that's helping it struggle. If it has its own struggles, we can correct those struggles by thinking clearly. There was I remember in psychology in college, they gave babies a test and they tested their blood and then saw what they were deficient in, and they gave them different foods, and the babies chose to eat the foods that satisfied the deficiency of the vitamin they had.
Huh.
We know those things. We're part of those things. The food, one of the guys in the near-death experience said that he looked at plants and he could see the light in each of them glowing, just a soft pulsating light that was in the plants.
Wow.
He was seeing through them. He wasn't seeing them the way we see them with visible eyes, the ones in our sockets.
Right.
He was seeing them with the knowing sense because he wasn't even looking with eyes, and yet he could see.
Right.
Very interesting. That awareness is here now with plants. It's the vitality that they're offering in that life force is designed to be shared with our bodies so that it can continue to help us function.
Well, I had this conversation with you about Cokes, and you were telling me how much sugar. So that thought was there. But for some reason, I know this is a silly topic, but for some reason, I just saw my water Yeti cup and I thought, I think I'll put some ice in that and water. And so I quit drinking the Cokes automatically because I think I was looking for liquid.
Well, there's water in Coke, but there's also water in arsenic. So it's not always the best thing to do. So anyway, my sense is our guidance system knows what to do, just as you knew to put glass in a water and keep it near. It became obvious. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't those things we intimately know. That may seem a bit banal, but it's not. It's a very good indication of that sense of knowing. And we know those things. So that is the point of our discussion. That is the point of us getting together to begin to actually explore these ideas and look at the possibilities rather than simply reinforce the impossibilities as something we're constantly trying to get over, when in fact, if we admit collectively that they're delusional, there is nothing to get over. It's already over. We just kept restarting it, and the thinking we do about it, thinking it's so critical to our dependence in our life, when in fact it's a dependence on insanity and attempt to kill ourselves effectively. And we're doing a great job of it as a species.
Yep.
Love you guys.
Love you too, Jack.
Carry on.
Love you. Thank you all.
Breathe deeply, drink plenty of water.
Thank you. Good to see you guys.
Thanks for
See you
coming,
all.
Anthony, from France.
Yes.
Anthony, nice to see you or talk to you.
Parlez-vous.
Michael, bye-bye.
And congratulations
Bye-bye.
on 154 days, Loretta.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank
On
you.
every day.
Thank y'all. See y'all later.
Okay.
Love you.
Toodaloo.
Bye.
Toodaloo.